Hello, viewers. Welcome to CBN and welcome to my special show. It's Mahbub's guest, and today is the first episode. And I'm very much proud that today I have an excellent person with me. I'm really proud of him because he always look after the Bangladeshis who are living in, especially in Toronto, the Danforth area. And I found that guy is always, engaged with any Bangladeshi programs. So that's why he is a favorite person. He is very known face to us, to everyone, and he is none other than our own Nathaniel Erskine Smith. So I'm just welcoming him right now. Nathaniel, welcome to our today's show, and we are very glad that we have you in our today's show.
Well, thanks for
And
having me, and hello to everyone tuning in.
so, how is life? How is going everything during this pandemic?
It's been incredibly hectic. I mean, when everything happened and really went faster, and everything, businesses were shutting down, and people were losing their jobs, and obviously a health crisis that precipitated that economic crisis that we still face today. But in March, April, and May, it was incredibly hectic, not only responding to constituent concerns, but then taking those constituent concerns and bringing them back to Ottawa and making sure that we were not only implementing programs to help people, but that we were also adjusting programs based on the feedback that we were hearing. And over time, adjusted that advocacy towards greater health efforts. And so it's difficult because the province is fundamentally responsible for leading the public health efforts. But at every opportunity, we're trying to support those efforts at the federal level and push as much as we can to get testing and tracing to happen to a faster and more efficient degree. And then just personally, we were chatting before the broadcast started, but I've been lucky. Ordinarily, I go back and forth between Toronto and Ottawa. My parliamentary duties have resumed. I'm still on the industry committee. I still participate in parliament, but it is now virtual.
Yeah,
And so I've been able to work from home principally. Sometimes I'll go to the office and work from the basement of the office, but I am able to see my family. And I have a 3.5-year-old, I have a 5-month-old, and my wife needs all the help because she does so much. But it's been great to be able to be home and help and see family more and more.
so you're still going to office during this pandemic. So
Yeah, so our office is closed, but we are still here to serve constituents. I should mention at the outset, if you have any questions, make sure you check out our website at beynate.ca. You can email me at nathaniel.erskine-smith@parle.gc.ca. But I will say we are very responsive in terms of getting back to people by email. The phone lines are obviously not as functional because we don't have folks in the office working. I go up to the office to have meetings like this, but traditionally during the day it's easier without a 3.5-year-old screaming in the background to get some of the work done. So it's just me up there in the basement.
got it. So, I mean, basically the Canadians and all over the world, we are facing this kind of problem, the pandemic, the coronavirus, and everything. So, and the government, the Canadian government, and your government, basically the Justin Trudeau government, is helping a lot to our people. So, what is your plan? Like, as far I know, this is the fourth month is going for the CERB, and you promised that your government is promised that they will go for 1 month more, right? So after that, what will be happening?
So very briefly, for those less familiar with the CERB, or what we refer to as the CERB, it's a $2,000 benefit that's paid out every month for people who have lost employment income, or for people who have had to stay home to look after kids because schools have closed, but for people deeply impacted and who have lost income as a result of the pandemic. So anyone who lost income post March 15th, really. Now, you are able to access that benefit for 16 weeks on the current rules,
Yeah.
and you're able to access that benefit for any 4-week period between March and October. So if you didn't lose your job until May, say, then you're still eligible for those 16 weeks, but over an extended period of time. But the problem right now is we have a number of people who obviously lost employment, many in our constituency who lost them, and in our community who lost employment in March. They've applied and been eligible for the CERB for March, April, May, and June. So at the end of this month, we are going to see those benefits expire. And we can't possibly have stepped in with a significant income support to help Canadians and our neighbors in need and then let that expire. So my advocacy right now, just this last week, I worked with colleagues from the Senate and the House of Commons to get over 60 parliamentarians to sign on to a call to extend the CERB, to redesign the CERB so that it's more efficient, so people can get back to work and not lose the entire benefit, and also to make sure that we fill gaps that we've left on the table. So we've adjusted the program, we've improved the program over the last few months, but I would argue that it still needs to be improved, and there are still some gaps that we need to fill.
Great, great. And okay, so I'm just introducing you one more time to my viewers who basically join later on. So here, our Nathaniel Erskine Smith, our very favorite person and very famous face to our Bangladeshi community who are especially living in the Victoria or the Bangla town or the Beaches East-Tier. So he is the member of parliament in Beaches East-Tier, and he is the chair of Canada-Bangladesh Parliamentary Friendship Group. He is the member of Standing Committee of Industry, Science and Technology. He was basically the past president, Canadian Group of Interparliamentary Union. So you did a lot of things. You're a very young parliamentarian, and this is your second term. So how basically you compare your first term and the second term? How you compare your activities?
I mean, we're early on in this parliament, but obviously there is no way to really compare the two, given we had a 4-year term and we were a majority government, and everything happened as one might expect in Parliament. There were ups and downs, and there were frustrations along the way, great successes and achievements along the way too. Obviously, the Canada Child Benefit helped bring 300,000 kids out of poverty and supported many families. So there were signature achievements along the way. But I will say we got elected in October as a minority government, so already some changes. And so committees function a little bit differently, where we have to secure votes from the opposition to get what we'd like to see studied and what we'd like to see recommended. But I'll tell you, we were elected in October. We sit for the first time in early December, as we traditionally do. We hit the ground running ahead of January once the parliamentary infrastructure and committees are all set up. And then the pandemic really takes hold, and we have to close everything down in March. And so it's been a very strange parliament, and it's great that we've had a virtual parliament so far, but it's also challenging. We don't have votes. We're not able to address other legislation other than COVID legislation. And there's obviously really significant COVID legislation, but there are people in need in other contexts who need legislation to support them, and we need to, I think, continue to improve our rules so we can debate and pass and vote on legislation that helps people outside of the pandemic.
Great. Ned, one more thing, you talked about the CERB. What about the international students? You're also helping, your government is also helping the international students. So how they're getting the benefits right now?
So international students are eligible for the CERB. They are eligible for the $2,000, but there are some challenges here. And the challenges principally are that, one, they had to have lost a job after March 15th. That's one. Many international students, though, were working part-time jobs while also studying, and they likely meet that criteria. But because oftentimes there is part-time work involved, the second criterion, which is you have to have earned $5,000 in the previous 12 months before you lost your employment.
Yes.
Some international students, I would say many international students, don't qualify on that criteria. Maybe they weren't in the country long enough, they just arrived, or maybe they simply worked part-time and didn't earn $5,000 in the previous year. So there are some challenges. It's not just international students, though, that are deemed ineligible on this criteria. There are over 1 million Canadians that are ineligible based upon the criteria that we've set. So this is what I mentioned earlier. I mean, we do have to fill the gaps. The only thing I would say, I did mention this to Ahmed Hussein. He joined us for a town hall event online, and I did mention the international student issue came up, and I did mention to him beforehand that it was likely to come up. And he did reiterate, we do have obviously thresholds where individuals are expected to be coming with a certain amount of money to afford their education, afford their housing. And so one challenge that we do face is principally the CERB is designed to respond to people who have lost income or who have lost opportunity because of the pandemic. And in some cases, international students don't fall in that category, where certainly if they weren't working, but even if they were working and earning a small amount, it becomes a bit of a challenge.
All right. And what about the Bangladeshi people? How you're helping the Bangladeshi people in your riding?
A number of different ways, I would say. So first off, if we look at the last parliament, I was very vocal early on the Rohingya refugee crisis, and we've worked in partnership. Bangladesh, as a country, has had to support well over 1 million refugees from the genocide in Myanmar. And so we've been there through Bob Ray's efforts and our own parliamentary efforts. We've been there to support. I would say we've also made sure that affordability for anyone living in Victoria Park and Danforth, I know that affordability is a concern, whether it is rent or whether it is childcare, frankly, or just affording the daily needs for looking after one's kids. So I mentioned the Canada Child Benefit earlier, but we have significantly expanded Canada child benefits in this country in the last 5 years. We also promised to expand them further. In the course of this pandemic, we pushed, and I was early on arguing for greater income supports. So we saw the CERB developed. I'm currently advocating for that CERB to be expanded and extended because I know that affordability crunch matters so much to our community. I just recently interviewed John Tory on a podcast that I've started at uncommons.ca, and I raised the issue of affordable housing and the need to build affordable housing faster. And at the federal level, we've seen significant, I would say historic from the federal government's perspective, investments not only in affordable housing. It's hard to help people today on affordable housing because it takes years at the city level to build these units. But over the long run, we're going to be addressing affordability through that. And I would say also, we are investing historic amounts in public transit. And I know that so many in the community depend upon Victoria Park subway station, depend upon the subway, and depend upon transit to get around. And so we have made significant investments to ensure that Toronto is able to invest in their transit. Just recently, we've given $14 billion to the provinces to help with transit, childcare, and more. And so we are trying as much as we can. And as the chair of the Canada-Bangladesh Friendship Group, I've been pushing on those affordable issues, certainly. And then the last thing I'll say is we have also not only a human rights focus through the Rohingya refugee crisis, we've also been focused on trying to sort out some immigration issues. I have two staff in my office who are one young and one older who are able to who are Bangladeshi themselves, who live in the community, are able to respond to people, and I think it's really important if I'm to represent the community. Not only I'm from the area and I grew up here, but that I have staff who are able to reflect the concerns and respond to the concerns. So that as well. And then beyond human rights, trade. So we have some challenges with China, obviously, very in the last year plus, and so I have been very vocal for years now about the need to expand upon a strong working relationship with the Bangladeshi government to expand trade as well. So, look, there are any number of ways that I have tried to be a voice as the chair of the Canada-Bangladesh Parliamentary Friendship Group, including changing some of the immigration rules, not just helping people through immigration processes, but changing the rules so that there's not discrimination there. But I would say, for anyone listening, if you have ideas for me to take forward, let me know. I mean, despite the pandemic, it feels like it's been years. We are very early on in this parliament, and there's going to be a lot to do here. So please be in touch. I'll continue to push on affordability and basic income supports, whether it's for families with kids or for people working multiple jobs and still struggling to get by. But do be in touch with your ideas. That's ultimately what this is all about.
All right. Nate, so many people, they basically suffered now because of the coronavirus, and the number you saw that, yeah, it still is, the number is not too much if we compare with our neighbor, USA, but definitely people are affected with coronavirus. So what is the vision for your government in future? Like how basically the economic structure your government will improve? So what are the visions you have or your government has right now?
So a couple of different things. First, it's really important to note that this is an economic crisis. People have been deeply impacted on the economic side, but because it is a health crisis, and I know there are many people who have been directly affected or their family members have been affected because of the pandemic, but there are many more people who haven't been directly affected by the health crisis, but have been affected by the economic crisis. But how do we solve that economic crisis? So there has to be government support, and there has been government support for small businesses, for individuals, and that's been critical. We're talking unprecedented amounts of spending in a very short period of time. For every dollar spent on supporting this crisis, over 90% has come from the federal government, our government. We have the capacity and we've delivered. Now, on the health crisis, the challenge here is that provinces are leading the way. And so some provinces like BC, under the leadership of Bonnie Henry, have excelled and succeeded, and they've been able to reduce the cases and the deaths, frankly, and they've been able to contain it. We haven't seen the same success in Ontario. Some parts of Ontario, yes, certainly not here in Toronto, and we haven't seen the same success in the Montreal area, in the greater Montreal area either. And this presents real challenges where we need, as a federal government, to support those provincial efforts, but it is frustrating at the same time where you don't see testing and tracing, isolation and support in the same way that we need to. We've had public health experts publicly call for greater action on testing and tracing. The province has slowly responded to those calls. I myself in the House of Commons called for greater action from the province, and I elevated the voice of doctors here at Michael Garron Hospital who have been very public and vocal on this issue, working in the emergency room. They see COVID deaths themselves, and that story needs to be told. And so I think we have to continue to support provincial efforts, and we have to be forceful with provinces, not in a rude way to tear them down, but to say, here are the best practices from BC, here are the best practices from New Brunswick. Let's not waste this opportunity where we have shut our economies down. Let's double down on our health efforts. Here are the resources you need. We just out of that $14 billion I just mentioned, a significant chunk, depending upon the needs of the province, can go to PPE for businesses and for healthcare workers. So we are there as a federal government to respond on procurement. We're there to respond on tracing initiatives. We've said to provinces, we're there with a digital proximity tracing application if you need the support. So the challenge, though, is it's not us leading the way, right? It's us sort of leading from behind as best as we can. And that presents challenges when we haven't seen the leadership in Ontario or Quebec that we've seen from BC and other provinces.
All right. And, this question is like related to the current situation regarding the anti-racism, in USA, what happened, we saw, and in Canada as well, the Canadians, they also protest that even, so, and your government, we saw that Justin Trudeau, he actually, he showed his solitude to the people regarding the anti-racism. So from your side, what do you think about it? Like the anti-racism, how the Canadians are actually coping up with this?
So we like in Canada to look to the United States and think we're so much better than those in the United States. And in some respects, it's easy to do so because we look at racist efforts from the president to shut down the border to Muslim countries very early on in his presidency. And we can say, well, we don't do that here. We're a welcoming country. And we can draw clear contrast. We don't have the same, we absolutely have problematic police violence disproportionately against Black and Indigenous members of our community, but we don't have the same gun ownership. We don't have the same gun violence. We don't have the same police violence overall. And we certainly haven't seen, in response to protests here in Canada, we haven't seen very violent police brutality in response to those protests that we've seen in the United States. But, and there's a really important but here, we absolutely have legacies of racism that continue to this day. We have systemic racism where we see, on an outcome basis, Black and Indigenous people fare worse. And I don't want to also downplay racism against our newcomer community too. I mean, I know many people in the Bangladeshi community have experienced racism themselves. I know many people have reached out to me when it comes to Canadian work experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different ways that people get discriminated against, right? And sometimes it is because of the color of their skin. Sometimes it is because of the way that they speak. And sometimes it's just, there is enough of a difference that someone is prejudiced and bigoted, and that's problematic. And education is ultimately the solution. But in the short term, I would say we should look to ways of addressing the crisis of anti-Black racism, of anti-Indigenous racism, and racism writ large by building on our secretariat and our anti-racism secretariat, building on our anti-racism strategy, which we promised to do in our election platform. And I would say changing some of the laws too, right? So I've pushed on ensuring that mandatory minimum penalties, which were under Harper, are addressed. And I'm sponsoring a bill when it comes to the House from the Senate to do just that. So there are legal changes that we can make too. But in the end, I just read Where Do We Go From Here, a book by Martin Luther King from 1967. And he, time and time again, highlights the importance of economic justice. And we really need to, when we look at poverty rates among people of color, they are disproportionately high. When we look at poverty rates of Indigenous people, they are disproportionately high. And it's because of our legacies of racism and the racism that continues to this day. So I think we have to continue to focus on economic justice. I mentioned expanding the CERB. I think we do need to expand our social safety net and to end poverty as much as we reasonably can. And that would go a long way as a matter of economic justice.
Got it. And Nathaniel, you are the member of Standing Committee on Industry, Science, and Technology. So what kind of activities basically you need to do in this field here?
We have 2 meetings a week where they are public hearings. Anyone can tune in, although I don't know how many people do tune in. And we were initially looking at the government's response to COVID-19 from an industry perspective. So we were looking at investments in rapid testing. And I mentioned leadership from the federal government, but supporting provincial efforts. So we've invested a significant amount in companies to develop rapid testing kits. We know that's critical to reopen the economy, that where we can, whether it's at airports or in businesses where we're likely to, or in schools, for example, the ability to rapid test will allow us to contain any second wave and any further outbreaks of this. So it's really critical. We've been investing in those efforts. Our industry committee has looked at that. Similarly, human tracing is really important, but we've heard from some experts that it could be supplemented by applications on our mobile phones to help public health units better trace when someone is diagnosed, who have they been in contact with. And so we have, again, at the industry committee, we have looked at that and how the federal government can better support and some of the challenges on privacy to overcome those challenges to better protect public health. And lastly, we've looked at how we can better support some businesses, right? So some industries are harder hit than others, and we've looked at that as well. And most recently, we are looking at the Investment Canada Act. And there's a concern from the opposition members that we have a policy actually from the government of Canada mid-April that addresses this, but there was a concern from the opposition members that we need to address foreign direct investment in this crisis, and we don't want China, as an example, as an authoritarian regime coming in and buying up Canadian companies on the cheap if there's a national security interest in those companies. And so we have, as a government, already published a policy paper that says there's additional scrutiny on such acquisitions, but that's something we're looking at right now. And what I'm really interested in, frankly, is recovery. And I hope that our industry committee looks at what recovery looks like from a federal public investment perspective. So we're looking at issues like childcare. We ought to look at issues like housing. We ought to look at issues like expanded social security, like income supports, like the Can and Shall benefit, but for working age adults who have suffered so much. Employment rates are not going to come back to where they were pre-pandemic anytime soon. So that's really important. And we also need to look at public investments in infrastructure like transit and public investments to transition our economy to a cleaner one, because we know on the outside of this crisis looms another crisis, which is our climate crisis. And we need to be serious about that too.
Got it. And Nate, you are the chair of Canada-Bangladesh Friendship Parliamentary Friendship Group. So, and even you visited Bangladesh before in 2017. I remember that. And
I did. I was very lucky to be able to visit, and
how was that?
I'll never forget the first time I saw Dhaka traffic. I'll tell you that. But but in all seriousness, it was. I mean, I already knew this because people in our community, post Eid prayer, I'm invited to so many people's homes, and people just open their doors and open their homes to me, and so I've made so many friends because people in the community are so welcoming. And the same was true in Bangladesh, right? I mean, the same was true. People were so very welcoming, happy to see me. And there's such a strong Canadian Bangladeshi connection. I was meeting members of parliament in Bangladesh that had kids going to school in Canada, more than one. So, I mean, there's such a strong connection, and it's nice to have visited, and I hope to visit again when this is all over. But
what did you like about Bangladesh?
What's that?
What did you like about Bangladesh?
Honestly, so I would, if I go back, I will make a point of going to see Cox's Bazar. I'll make a point of going to see Chittagong. I'll make a point of going to see Sylhet. I'll make a point of seeing places outside of Dhaka. But I was there on business. I was there for an international conference of parliamentarians, over 600 parliamentarians. I did not have an opportunity to leave Dhaka for that week. And so for me, what really stood out, I did get to visit the Shahid Minar. I've obviously gone to so many International Mother Language Day ceremonies here in Toronto, so it was really important to me to visit the actual Shahid Minar in Dhaka. I also was able to visit the Museum of the Father of the Nation, so there were elements like that were interesting for me. But because I didn't get to leave Dhaka and see the beauty really of the country, it was the people that stood out the most.
Exactly. So, do you have any message for Bangladeshi community who are living here, especially in your riding, BHS Stewart?
I would reiterate that we are here for you if you need our assistance. And not every issue is a federal issue. Some issues are provincial, like rent control. Some issues are municipal. But I'll say we are happy to connect you to those offices if we can't help ourselves and if it's not within our jurisdiction. And I would reiterate, too, that in this crisis, as the federal government, we have continued to step up and support individuals in need, to support small businesses in need, and we will continue to be there for you. And if you have any ideas, I mean, part of our democracy demands representation, and so I need to be channeling your concerns into Ottawa and with my representatives. And I've tried to do so. I mentioned affordability. That is an issue that arises again and again and again. I'll tell you, recently I had Rogers at my industry committee, and we were looking at telecom affordability. And Rogers said to me, "Oh, it's a $75 cell phone plan is affordable." And I had to say, "Hang on a second there. Come visit Crescenttown with me, because I'll tell you, people in my community don't think that that is affordable, and they're right." So I think we have to continue as a government. We have to continue to look after those in need, and those lower and middle income Canadians principally. And I take that effort really seriously, not only as the chair of the Canada Bangladesh Parliamentary Friendship Group, but I also take it seriously as a chair of the Anti Poverty Caucus as well. So these are the efforts that I'm focused on, and I'll continue to be focused on human rights issues too, and improving immigration. I just spoke with Marco Mendicino, our immigration minister, about ensuring that family members can reunite. And there was a recent announcement: immediate family members can come to Canada and reunite. That's really important to note. I also was vocal about migrant workers. That, again, people who they don't have a strong enough voice to have rules that protect them. That's a parliamentarian's job. We've got to stand up and represent them, and make sure there are those protections.
Exactly. So this is last but not the least. In your riding, especially in the Danforth and Victoria Park, that intersection, so many Bangladeshi business owners are there, and most of them are affected by COVID-19.
Absolutely.
So what kind of help they'll be getting from your office, especially from your office? I mean, how you can help them?
So our job was twofold, right? So our job is to help businesses and business owners connect with federal programs.
Yeah.
And second, our job is to make sure that we are taking in feedback, providing it back to the Minister of Finance, and improving those programs. And so over the last couple months, we have seen the emergency business account, which is a $40,000 interest-free loan, and it's actually 25% of that is effectively a grant upon repayment. And so that's really important. And we've expanded the rules to make sure that you don't need any employees to participate in that. So that helps sole proprietors in our community, which is really important. Two, we have a wage subsidy, which is a hugely important program for businesses that have employees. We will cover 75% of the wages of employees up to $58,000 total wage. So it'll be 75% of that amount or less, depending upon the salary of the employee. And so that's been critical for businesses as well. And we have also stepped in when the province finally dug forward, said we're going to stop commercial evictions. But before that, we as a federal government, even though it is not our jurisdiction, even though it is a provincial matter, fundamentally, tenancies, both residential and commercial, we stepped up and we provided federal support. So the dollars in the system to support the commercial rent assistance program, 70 of $900 million program, $650 million comes from the federal government. And if there are business owners out there who want to access these programs and they're unaware of them, contact my office. If there are business owners out there who think the program needs to be improved, contact my office. And that's part of the job.
I'm just before closing our conversation, so there is a question from our audience. Sheikh M. Anwar Hussain, he's asking, like, everyone is talking about jobs, healthcare, but no one is talking about refugees applicant in Canada. So what is your government thinking about the refugees applicants?
Honestly, this is a real challenge, and it's a real challenge because we face human rights in some ways, right, of refugees and our desire to help, pitted against serious public health measures that countries around the world are having to adopt. And so there was, especially with the challenges in the United States and their lack of direction and their inability to address this crisis, early on, we said asylum seekers coming from the United States through Roxham Road and to Quebec and beyond are not going to be eligible to come into Canada anymore. And that is a problem. I spoke to Amnesty International's executive director about that, and I will continue to push our government to change those rules and to make sure we're better protecting refugees. And the other piece, and this is a conversation that we have now our immigration caucus that has begun again on a weekly basis. And I do think that we ought to change the rules to allow for more hearings to take place through Zoom or through some online hearing process. So we see courts already in the province of Ontario slowly but surely move to video conferencing and teleconferencing to resolve some issues. I think we need to do the same in our immigration system, because we can't accept delays when human rights are on the line. And so if there are ways that we can make sure people are protected from a public health perspective, but also fulfill our obligations to human rights and to refugees, then that's absolutely what we need to do. But I know that, look, these are not the only challenges. Everything has been slowed down because of COVID-19, and it's not just in our country, it's around the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, for your valuable time with us. And I hope the audience, you enjoyed our conversation and you got a lot of information. So thank you, Nat, again.
Thank you. And one thing I will leave you with. So it's really important. I spoke to the CEO of our local hospital, and she said she wants everyone to wear a cloth mask in our community when they're out in public, at a grocery store. Obviously, if you're walking outside in a park and you're keeping your distance from other people, it's not as necessary. But if you're going to be within a close distance to someone, especially if you're going to be in a retail environment, a grocery store or otherwise. And so my office, go to beynate.ca, and we are delivering free cloth masks through Canada Post. So make sure you fill out that form. You have to be a resident of Beaches, East York, so that unfortunately, Victoria Park is the dividing line between myself and Bill Blair. But for any resident of Beaches, East York, we will mail you a free cloth mask. And we will also, because Canada Day is coming up, if you fill out the form, we will also mail you a free Canada flag. And I hope to see Crescent Town and beyond. I hope to see, every balcony and every home in our community have a Canada flag, a celebration, because we're not going to be able to have the East York Canada Day parade in a way that we've had in previous years. So otherwise, Osmani, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, and wishing you all the best, wishing your family all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. So, dear audience, so this is my Mahbub's guest first episode. So hopefully in the next show, there will be some other special person with you. I'm not introducing them right now. I'm not telling we will be coming in the next episode, but definitely there will be someone will share their experience, and maybe a politician, maybe an upcoming politician or someone. So thank you very much for joining with me and joining with the CBN. Stay with CBN and stay well during this pandemic time. As Nathaniel Erskine Smith mentioned, that please keep yourself safe, keep your family safe, stay safe. Thank you very much.